everyone. We really hope you enjoyed this episode. So, if you're watching on YouTube, if you could please like, share, and subscribe to our YouTube channel, or if you're listening on Spotify, you can always follow us there. Every like and share and subscribe can help our channel to be seen by many more Stargate fans. So, we really appreciate it. And then we also have all of our socials listed up on the screen right now if you wish to follow us there. Okay, thank you, and I hope you enjoy. Bye. And to all the Stargate fans out there, we would love to hear from you and chat with you on our show. So if you're interested in doing that, please reach out to us via any of our social media platforms or email.
I was actually very inspired by this conversation we had with Donna, where we were talking specifically about the different relationship qualities and sort of character dynamics between all three shows. And she had a really unique way of contrasting them. And it occurred to me that actually a lot of things that people talk about when they contrast Stargate SG1, Stargate Atlantis, and Universe is very often the sort of storyline, sometimes the visual, but then also the character dynamics are talked about a lot, especially in a sense of how Universe I think was quite different. I thought it'd be interesting for us to talk a little bit about some aspects of those three shows and how we maybe think of them, specifically things that aren't so related to character dynamics and development, since that's such a prominently discussed thing, but maybe things like aesthetics, like the overall look, costumes even, and how that kind of contributes to the overall look and mood of the show. And then also the music, which I think actually really enhances the setting, but is sometimes overlooked as something that contributes to this. So
Yeah. Did you want to start with like anything that stood out to you, and we can kind of go from there?
I mean, maybe we can start just talking a little bit about aesthetics. I'll go over a little bit about my initial impressions of aesthetic of all three shows, and then you can kind of say your impression, and then we can kind of go from there. So for SG1, it's very interesting because I would say if you asked me what's the overall aesthetic of the show, I would say it's kind of bright and colorful in a way.
Yeah.
I think because it starts in a situation where you have a lot of green, a lot of trees, and I know it's there in the others, but the lighting is such that you do see a lot of the sort of visuals of the planets. They also do go to places with like sometimes the botanical gardens where there's a lot of flowers, and like overall the lighting and the scenes are very bright. The planet where they encounter some of the enemies at first on Chulok is kind of it's a tan, like this tan color, but again it's still very bright, and it has a lot of this aesthetic, like they have this sort of ancient Egyptian inspired aesthetics that are more bright and light in their overall tone. I think in the gold ships is the same. I don't know if you would notice this or like feel the same, but I think when you walk into the gold ship, it's darkness, but there's a lot of gold and a lot of bright aspect to it. I would say Atlantis is a little bit different because I found, especially in the pilot at some points, that the camera and the lighting was a bit dark. And I know they pulled back on that after the pilot, I think, but returned to it a little bit at the end. But the city itself is more of like a post, I mean, I don't want to say like post-apocalyptic, but it's a very post kind of color. It's everything is very dark metal. While there is this visual of the water, I still feel like this is a little bit dark. It's darker than green or darker than the sand of Abydos or something, or Chulak.
Yeah.
And I think that the Wraith ships also have this dark aesthetic. The ships themselves are dark. The places that they exist on the ship are dark. Where they're sitting is dark. And so I think is a little bit darker, but at the same time, I think there's contrasting things. For example, just the expansiveness. I think the fact that you have this sort of water planet where everything is very expansive, it kind of pulls you back out of this sort of dungeon-esque vibe.
Mm-hmm.
If you were to like, if I were to relate this to, say, video games, because it's something I'm a little bit familiar with in terms of the locations, you know, SG1 would be really like overworld dynamic, and SGA would be kind of like the underwater dynamic, which is not really
Yeah.
quite an underworld. It's not quite a dungeon, but it's not quite an overworld either. So it's like kind of this in between.
Yeah.
But I would put SGU starkly in the dungeon,
Yes.
because it's a closed space. There is like the materials itself are very dark, so the visual there is quite subdued. The lighting is also subdued, and so and they don't really spend a lot of time exploring planets where you see a lot of like overworld aspects. And so
Yeah.
I do feel a sense that, yeah, from an aesthetic perspective, it has this kind of dungeon feel. So I don't know if how
Yeah.
this relates to anything you maybe took away from the aesthetic of the three, but that's kind of a starting point.
I mean, I think that's perfectly said. Exactly. Like as you were saying it, like images were flashing into my mind of each show. And I'm just like, yep, that's exactly how I feel. Because it's like I feel like with SG1 too, it's just like, and I mean, I guess like the type of vibes that like the coloring of different series like SG1, Atlantis, universe. I mean, it makes sense too, right? I'm sure a lot of thought is put into this by those that create the show as to what vibe, they're wanting us to visually see that also makes us feel stuff. And so it's like with SG1, even just like going back, how like before we were talking about how I'm rewatching it currently with my daughter. Um, it's kind of like the brightness of some of the scenes and everything. It just always like I don't know, it just gives like this feeling of like when you're watching it, it's just like either it will make you notice like, oh yeah, this is like a really new place they are going visiting, and a new planet that's like it's like, but it's like it will give like almost like more of an explorer vibe that's kind of almost like a friendly vibe, if that makes sense, even though the Goa'uld like are like a lot of times very like he says, a lot of gold coloring and everything. I think maybe that's why too, that like um it's maybe less threatening feeling when they encounter certain villains of the show, because it's like with the Goa'uld, it's like I feel like it's a very like Egyptian gold themed kind of thing, and like it's like even like with like the what was it in the beginning with one of the Apophyse's ship, it's like a pyramid, right? Like I believe it's and so it's like it gives like a certain feeling and vibe when you're watching it. And then yes, with Atlantis, I mean, I feel also with SG1 though, as before I get to Atlantis, as they continued like through to the later seasons, that probably changes up a little bit, that it maybe goes into a little bit of like a darker realm slightly with certain things. And like I was thinking of like the replicators, for example, like
Mm.
the coloring of that, and their ships, like that initially wasn't there when you're first introduced to the replicators. If I remember, I was talking about this where we were like, what? It was purple? What? Like, and it was like this weird like image where it was like purple, but then every other time it's not purple. It's like what, more of like a silvery gray kind of like thing. So I found like that's kind of like interesting. And I think someone had said a reason for this. There was like a reason that they thought that maybe that first time it was purple. Because it's like, like they're from the certain like things that they're taking the materials from or whatever. But
Yes,
like
exactly.
um so maybe that's why. But I feel like if they remained purple, like what would you have thought of the replicators? You know what I mean? Like I feel like it's less like um threatening. I don't know.
Yes,
Um
totally.
so it's like I think of that when I think of like SG1, definitely with the bright colors and all of that. I agree with you. Then with Atlantis, like at first I wasn't thinking of it as being darker, but then as you were talking about, I'm like, no, you're right. Like it is like a little bit not quite as bright, a little bit more subdued. There's like kind of like the darker blues and everything. And even like if you look at that image behind you, you're on your Zoom screen, like that's Atlantis, right? Like so it's like it's like the colorings of that too were used like a lot. I mean, maybe that's a little bit darker, but like um and then definitely with universe, oh my god, like that's one of the things I mentioned is how it's really hard for me to watch because of that whole vibe of also just like the darkness of every scene. And then it's like when they do finally get off like onto a planet or something, it's just kind of like you're like, oh, I can breathe. It's like it makes you almost feel like claustrophobic with like the color scheme of that show and the vibe that they give. So yeah, I mean, I think it's like interesting, and I think clearly it works, like for the reasons that they're chose to use that kind of aesthetic and everything. But yeah, I would say like there's not anything that I disagree with you with when you mentioned all the different things that you're thinking of for each one.
Yeah. It's interesting you bring up the replicators though, because as much as I think aesthetically the Goa'uld are kind of brighter, so to speak, than the Wraith, I think the replicators visually in SG1 begin much darker than when they first appear in Atlantis. Because you're totally right. The replicators have this sort of gray, I mean, or I guess originally purple, which I also like. It's one of those things somebody notices this detail, but it probably I saw it and like forgot because you're
Yeah.
thinking when you first see the replicators, you're thinking more, oh my gosh, what is this? Um,
Yeah.
but they do have that like gray robot dark kind of, and they move a certain way, and they have this theme song that's very um dark. But I think the replicators later on, when they become the human form replicators, I mean, somehow I know they're like more terrifying as human form replicators, but aesthetically they're actually in a way more bright because they have
Yeah.
this human form, they're wearing this clothes. So it's interesting that the aesthetic is a little bit in disagreement with the actual threat level. That's very interesting
Yeah.
because actually I
Yeah.
think the replicators in Atlantis being like based off of the original Lanteans, right? They were original
Yeah.
kind of based off of that. The way they dress and the way they look, they're actually quite non-threatening looking, and I think they're the most
Yeah.
threatening replicators. So
Yeah.
to me, they're the
Yeah.
scariest ones, and yet they aesthetically look the least. So that's kind of an interesting sort of disjunction that probably is kind of cool as a viewer to experience that
Yes.
there's that sometimes there's these aesthetic things that really do make you feel more concerned or suspenseful in a way, but then
Yeah.
sometimes there's these things that is really they're actually much scarier when they are looking aesthetically less threatening. So
Yeah. Yeah. And I think too, like, definitely, I agree with all that. And I think too, like, one thing I was just thinking of is also like the the way the scenes look when you're watching SG1 and they suddenly have like an outside scene, like out of like
mm.
Stargate Command. And so, like, for example, me and my daughter Taylor just watched the one where it's with Machello, and
Yeah.
so
Oh,
Daniel
okay.
Jackson or Machello, like goes out into the outside world, is supposed to be going back to his apartment or whatever, and then ends up finding the homeless guy that he's eating lunch with and all this stuff. And it's like whenever there's like those outside scenes, or like even in SG1 where it was the one where Teal'c had that weird thing where he was turning into like a weird uh a bunch of oh, what was it?
Oh,
What was that?
Bane, yeah, those bugs.
Yeah, the bugs. And then that also involved like outside like scenes. It always catches me off guard for some reason, like with the lighting and everything. And I think possibly too, it's like because of it being the time period that it was that they filmed. Like it's
Mhm.
like maybe I think what I'm sensing more so is like the old um
Hmm.
camera quality is maybe what I'm seeing.
Yes, true. Yeah,
That can sometimes play a factor, I think, on these types of shows, because like it's like the brain is recognizing like, oh, well, when I see like something filmed outside in a movie now, it's not going to have that weird lighting to it. It's gonna, it's gonna feel comfortable. Whereas like it gives off like an old fashioned thing to it that I can't quite express fully. But like that's also something that I think is kind of unique maybe to SG1.
true.
Um,
Very true.
because
Very
I
true.
don't remember seeing scenes like that. Like because of obviously when you're in Atlantis, you're not gonna suddenly be on Earth out with all the regular folks. Like, well, there may have been
So,
a few, but it was still different. I don't know.
yeah, I mean, it was, I guess it was probably later. So the lighting and camera, I think, were already, the trends were already different. But I know
Yeah.
exactly what you mean. I think it also doesn't help, like, at least for me, in SG1, whenever they're kind of in the real world and then they're wearing their sort of street clothes, until probably season 7, their street clothes really reflect the 90s to me. Like they really
Yes.
reflect the time period that they're in. Um,
Yeah.
I think you start to feel a little bit more of a, okay, we're in the knots now vibe in the 7th season. You know, when maybe
Yeah.
when Carter is dating Pete and she starts dressing a little differently, and um, you see sometimes later on like Vala and Carter out and they're dressed more modern, I think. And so you can
Yeah.
see a little bit more of this. But in the very early seasons, it's very has this kind of extreme, late 90s. You feel very, you can feel the 90s in the clothing. So that always
Yes.
throws me a little
Yeah.
bit when they're in the street clothes.
Yeah. And it's also kind of funny now that you're speaking of like clothing. It's kind of funny like to look like even if you do like a Google search of like SG1 and then you'll see all the different like images for all the different seasons. It's kind of like so clearly different as it gets to later seasons. It's like they try and have them look a little bit more like badass and hardcore and maybe like showing their arms or like, like it's like they're all wear like the other day where did I see that? I don't know. I happened to see an image where it was like showing like SG1 posing and like they're all wearing like a black like tank top kind of thing. Where in the very beginning of SG1 it's like very military looking and like the darker green, like camouflagey green kind of colors initially and all of that. So it's like interesting how like, you know, that also changes too, even just within that one series of SG1 and not even thinking about the other ones, like how they physically like look with their clothing because it was first 10 years, right? So it's like interesting like the different vibes they give for the team itself based off of what they choose to have them wear.
That's so true. That's interesting. You just made me think about, actually, I know Atlantis was only 5 years, but still, if you look at
Mm-hmm.
season 1 of SG1 to season 5, there are some differences. But I feel like you're right. Like when you think about the visuals of the main characters in SG1, they look totally
Mm-hmm.
different by the end. Like if you take
Yeah.
each individual one and we just kind of go through it aesthetically, I think probably Sam and Daniel are the most starkly different. Um,
Yes. Yeah.
at least aesthetically, I think I know that all the characters went through, of course, their own developments outside of aesthetics, but aesthetically, I think Sam and Daniel, they definitely were very, very different in the beginning of the show in terms of, I think, the aesthetic that they were trying to put off with the character versus what they were trying to demonstrate at the very end.
Yeah.
Um,
Yeah. And actually, Sam's an interesting one to think of because if you think about it, then once it goes to Atlantis and you're introduced to her character coming onto Atlantis, like when she's going, like, if I remember correctly, it may have been the part where So if you're watching the shows where it's like back to back for a while, like Atlantis and SG1 and kind of going back and forth until eventually SG1 ends, right? I think it's like the Atlantis episode after SG1 ends that I believe Carter's like in like a ship or something, and she's like helping trying to figure something out, and she has like longer hair where she has like, oh sorry, I hit my microphone. She has longer hair where like she has it tied back, and it's like a longer ponytail and a little bit of like a bangs kind of thing. That I feel like I don't remember her having that at the end of SG1. And so it, at least that's my memory of it. And so it gives a very like different vibe when I see her on Atlantis in that way
Mm-hmm.
than when I'm seeing her on SG1. And I think that was probably intentional, is to have it purposely feel different, if that makes sense. I don't know if I'm making sense. I'm not very good with articulating what I'm trying to get out of my head, but I basically noticed like a difference there.
Oh yeah, no, totally. I completely agree. I mean, I think Sam's hair is very interesting because it's like a lot of people talk about it since every season she had a different hair.
Yeah.
And I mean, I know a lot of people think the same way, but I love all of Sam's haircuts post season 7, like season 7 onwards. I think is when her hair really got amazing. Like obviously, I think it looked good before, but I probably my guess would be the haircuts are just more reminiscent of that time period, like their short
Yeah.
haircuts you would have gotten in like the late 90s. And so it's a little bit more reflective of that, where I feel there was actually a lot more I don't know, I feel like in the mid 2000s there were a lot more different styles of like shorter haircuts and so her and different ways of cutting hair and things that were maybe more popular, that I feel like after
Yeah.
season 7, and it's like somehow the way that her hair was on like framing her face, it had like it made everything pop in a really really nice way. So for me aesthetically, those post season 7 haircuts, I love them all, even like
Yeah.
including the long one. I think the long one is really a nice difference, like you said. Um,
Yeah.
and it's kind of cool. I guess maybe it's trying to like put her in more of a leader role. And I don't know if this is
Mm-hmm.
kind of an intentional thing, but in a way, she had to have a certain haircut when she was kind of under like other people, but now she's like in
Yeah.
charge, and so it's something she can do. Um,
Yeah.
it's interesting because her long hair in the first shows, when they showed her like alternate Sam with long hair, I don't know, I was just so not used to seeing her with long hair. I was like, oh wow, I really don't like the long hair. But it's so funny that then later on, I love the long hair. I think it looks really, really good. So I maybe
Well,
it's just the way they did it, or I don't know.
yeah, because wasn't the long hair in like that version of her that was like wigs, right?
It
And maybe
must
just
have been, yeah,
the
must have been.
wigs weren't very good. Like I feel like also with that kind of thing, wigs have improved over time as well. So if an actor's wearing a long-haired wig, there's probably a million different choices with a million different hairstyles. And I think they just kind of chose a very, very basic one that,
Yeah.
yeah, I mean, it was okay. It's interesting that you mentioned like how you liked her hair later on, because yes, I feel the same way. Like I don't remember specifics as to what seasons like I started to like her hair best. I would have to probably, I'll notice it as I'm rewatching the show with my daughter. But what's funny is I did mention to my daughter when we were first watching it, I said, oh, just like wait for all the different hairstyles. And I'm like, yeah, I'm like, this one's okay. Like, but like her hair gets like I like her hair better later on. And Taylor like loves Sam's hair. Like she's just
Yeah.
like, oh, really? Like I love it. Like I think it looks good. And like I'm just like, yeah, it's like okay, but like I like it later on and stuff. So it's kind of interesting to kind of going back to what we were talking in our last episode, like hearing that younger perspective. Like she doesn't like, I don't know if she saw it as like an old fashioned cut at all. She just kind of liked it. So like I thought that was like interesting, because I look at it and I think, oh, it's kind of really old fashioned and I just don't know how I feel about this. And like, and I feel like other hairstyles, like maybe because of the time that I grew up in, maybe it makes me feel more comfortable seeing those other hairstyles because it's something that like I grew up more in that time of seeing that type of like short hairstyles as opposed to like the older ones where it just kind of feels a little cringe sometimes. But I mean, speaking of hairstyles though, like the worst, in my opinion, is sometimes what Daniel's hair goes through.
You mean early on? His hair's
Because
seen some stuff.
well, yeah, like I am not looking forward to when it gets to that weird, like almost Julius Caesar hairstyle. Like it's just like weird. Like I don't know if you remember, but like, and I haven't gotten back to this part of it yet on the rewatch, but there's a point where his hair has these weird little, very, very short little bangs that are like right in the
Oh
front.
yeah.
And it just looks so bad. And I really, regardless of time period of whatever year it was, cannot see that ever being a thing.
At least he never had frosted tips, and we can be very grateful for
Yeah, yeah,
that. But
yeah, very
no,
true.
it's really funny you mentioned Taylor liking Sam's old hair. I think it's really a Gen Z thing that they like all of this like 90s Y2K aesthetics. Like I
Yeah.
swear, like, and it was just yesterday that I saw some random, like, I don't know, Instagram reel or something where this person was making a skit, and it was like high school in, the year 2004 or something, and she was wearing high socks, and everybody was making fun of her, saying you have to wear ankle socks because I guess then
Uh,
everybody wore ankle socks. And then now in 24 or something, it was, I guess, an older thing, or maybe it said 2025. I can't remember, but she's wearing ankle socks, and everybody's making fun of her because now you need to wear the higher socks. So so I think it's something like, like these things go through somehow. I don't know, to me some of the earlier haircuts, like, it just gives me a little bit of, maybe because we had parents that were around this kind of age at the time, so we associate it with a
yeah.
mom cut. Like we look at this and go,
Yes.
oh,
Yeah.
that's what all the moms wore. But
Yeah.
they don't have that same association. They probably associate the later haircuts more with moms because it's like what our haircuts would be.
That's so, you know what? That's so true because that's also true if you think of like pants, right? Like I remember when it first started to become a thing where like it went like because when me and you were like young adults, teenagers, there was the low rise pants, right? And so like anything that went higher was like, oh my gosh, those are like weird mom jeans kind of thing. Of course, now they actually
Mm-hmm.
have a thing titled mom jeans, but like what's funny is then it went through a phase where like all of like the younger kids are wanting to wear really high-waisted pants, and it like really messed with my mind because I'm just like I do not understand this.
Yeah,
Why?
right.
And like it took me a while to kind of come around to it, and then I got used to seeing that, and like with myself I got used to like wearing things that were higher, a little bit higher up. I'm still could never wear like the really high-waisted ones, like that's just not my thing, but now it's kind of now going back around where now it's like
Yep.
there's some of like the really low rise stuff that's kind of coming back, and now it's like my daughter's age group kind of thing, and stuff like a teenagers basically I think now are kind of like in terms of just like regular pants that you wear like jeans and stuff are maybe like looping around to like the low rise. So it's just kind of like funny
Oh
because
no.
it's even like going back and watching like this show, right? Watching SG-1, and it's like initially certain things do remind you of certain time periods of life. But now it's like my brain is confused because those things are coming back. So it's like it doesn't always fully remind me of those times of life. It's kind of like also now too. So I'm just like, wait, what?
It's so true. And it's very telling because it basically says that since all of the Gen Z are so interested in these aesthetics, they should also therefore be interested in Stargate. Right?
Exactly. Exactly. Yes.
Now, I agree with you. Daniel's hair has not the same excuses as any of Sam's hair of being time period. I don't think he had a dad cut. I think in the beginning, I understand why they gave him the haircut they did. They were really trying to link his character with the original Daniel Jackson.
Yeah.
And I understand that. Like, I understand the reasoning behind this. I think it's very good they kind of moved away from that, because I actually think he's much later. I agree with you that one phase, I think I know what you're talking about, is not maybe the highlight of his hair resistance or whatever. But I think also later on his haircuts really suit him much better. Probably when he had more like authority over the character, and maybe they had grown into the show a little bit, and he could put more of, like, the actor could put more of his flair into the character. I think then the haircuts were much more suiting, I felt like. So I feel like in that sense, like, my perspective is that both Sam and Daniel had massive glow ups over the show.
Yeah.
And like aesthetically, but I think it's really, really interesting how in the case of Sam, it's much more historical archive, like her haircuts. And I
Yeah.
wonder, like, I'm not a cosmetologist or esthetician. Like, I have never studied this, but I would be
Mm-hmm.
really interested from someone that did study this, if there is some relationship between her haircuts and kind of what was popular, and how they related to what was popular during the time it was filmed. Because I do feel
Yeah.
there is something you do see in some, like we were talking about clothing, and I think early in the show you do see clothing that really, really reflects late 90s. This kind of flannel shirts, these jeans that are that very specific, like, jean color that after I
Yeah.
think 1999 nobody wore anymore. But everybody had these, and they're actually like the right, like, jean length, and they're not flare or too tight, but then after that everything became flare or too tight. So I think there is some of that really reflective, but the haircuts I've always found very interesting, because so many people
Yeah.
talk about Sam's haircuts, and yeah, so, and it's really interesting to me now that you said Taylor liked the early hair.
Yeah. Yeah. I was
So
surprised by that because I thought she was going to be like really like thinking it was like so cringe and stuff. And like, yeah, no, she was like really like, she likes it. She has zero
mhm.
problem with it. Um, but also too, like thinking of like hairstyles during certain time periods, like in real life, like I do feel like probably the initial Daniel Jackson hairstyle was kind of a thing at that time, right? Like,
That's
because if you think about it, it was
true.
kind of sweeping down. It's kind of similar to how, like, then there was like the Leonardo DiCaprio Titanic hairstyle. Like, it's kind of similar to that.
True, you're
Um,
right.
and so that was kind of thought of as like the hot hairstyle for the dudes at the time. Oh my God, sorry if you're hearing my stomach. I don't know what is my deal. You're probably not hearing my stomach. It's probably filtering it out, but my stomach literally sounds like it has a goal. It's like, but anyways,
That would be a nice
sorry.
addition to our podcast, actually. Just surprise.
Yeah.
I mean, it does say you're
Surprise.
the host of the meeting, just saying.
Yes. Oh my gosh, I've been found out.
I knew it. I knew it all along. Yeah.
But
I
like,
mean,
but yeah, like I do think with Daniel's hair, like it probably was kind of like the hot hair of the time. And then like it gradually changed. I still just, but like I do like his hair later on. And he does kind
yes.
of his character does become more and more badass as he continues throughout the season. And I feel like his hair reflects that.
Yeah, exactly. It kind of, the hair grows with him. And so I think that's kind of cool. It's interesting because Colonel O'Neill has the same hair the whole time. He always has the same cut. And Tilk, I think, other than a little bit of maybe one time where he has some hair, is mostly, I think later on he has some hair, but it doesn't really change a lot, other than when he gets the gray streak after an ending, which is kind of cool that they keep that. But the one with Tilk that really always sticks out to me is the time where he has the little, like, yellow
Oh,
goatee. I think that was a
I
very
hate
interesting.
that so much. That's like that freaking goatee was such a thing for dudes to get. It was probably around that same time. Like I remember my ex constantly growing a little patch of hair here, and I freaking hated it. And like I would like want to like I didn't want to be like, I feel like everyone should make themselves how they want to look, but I hated the goatee on what ex. but like, but like it was like so bad. And I don't know if you remember him having that, but it was always this gross little patch of hair just right here. And like there was a period of time where a lot of guys were just doing that. And I'm just
Yeah.
like, I don't get it. But Teal'c's is very, very like noticeable. Like it's like a little bit bigger than like that fad of like the little bit of hair there, but like so it's a much more noticeable goatee. And like e- even like if you think about it, like I know like we're used to like the progression of how they end up looking because we've seen the show multiple times. But if you think with Teal'c, we're so used to seeing him bald through majority of it. And then when he like either when there's certain like episodes where they'll give him a wig or hair or whatever, it's always so jarring. Like it's so like even in the very beginning when they do like a flashback scene. Oh wait, no, it's not a flashback scene, it's an alternate reality where
Oh
the
yeah.
first time they go to the alternate reality and um they show Teal'c kind of leading like he's still working for like Apophis basically, and like he has that crazy ass long ponytail thing like that's just like connected to the back of his head. Everything else is bald, but then the
Oh
massive
yeah.
ponytail. And like when me and Taylor were watching that, we nearly died. We could not stop laughing.
It's
So
probably
it's
trying to look more serious and badass, and it's making you laugh.
like, yeah, it's just so bad. Like, it's just so something about when a bald man suddenly has hair. It's just so jarring.
Or the ponytail, like the ponytail. Yeah. Oh
Well,
my
yeah, it's
God.
a ponytail, or like later on, once he suddenly grows his hair again, and like, like it's just like, I don't know, it just always like startles my mind.
Yeah, it's like that's
It
not
would be
deal.
kind of, yeah, it's kind of like the equivalent of like the episode I just watched with Taylor. There was that funny joke in it where when O'Neill and Teal'c switched consciousnesses, and basically Teal'c, as Jack's body, wanted to shave his head. Can you
Right, yeah.
imagine O'Neill with a shaved head? That
Nope.
would be very startling as well.
That
So
would
it's kind
be.
of like, yeah, I feel like it's like once you get used to seeing something, it's always weird. But then like with Teal'c, it's like whenever something has subtly changed, it's incredibly strange. But then I get used to it throughout the season if it stays there. But never the
The goatee.
goatee, no. That
Yeah.
every time I saw it, I just had the massive urge to shave it off.
I feel like I've read a lot of similar things about that it's not the people's favorite of all of the
Yeah.
character choices and shit. I know I think they all had
Yeah.
their moments. I think the only one that didn't really have any weird sudden change moments is O'Neill, because he had the same
Yeah.
haircut the whole time, the same aesthetics. He always had the same. When he would go off base, he always wore the same kind of, I don't know how you call this jacket, like bomber jacket or something.
Yeah.
Same jacket, like the jeans. And I think the fact that he remained with this aesthetic is very ideal for the character, because
That's what I was gonna say. Yeah.
I get this sense, especially considering, he has this lifestyle where he likes to go fishing, that in a way O'Neill lives this like high stakes life of going on other planets. But I have this feeling that outside of that, he's just kind of, he's very stable, like very stable with everything.
Well, and very routine.
Yes,
It
exactly.
kind of reminds like, a lot of like military people will like get used to living in a very routine kind of way. And it kind of actually reminds me of a really stupid show that I currently watch, reality show that I I don't know why I watch it, but I do because it's entertaining. And so like with like Love is Blind, The UK
Yeah.
version, because I'm not a fan actually of the US version anymore, but the UK version, I love the people that host that show. Like, and they had one previous season of Love is Blind UK and I really liked it. So anyways, they have the new season, and in this new season, there's a guy that works in, like, I forget what he does in the military, but like he basically trains other guys and gets them into like a certain type of lifestyle. And so it was kind of like this point of like, oh, is this what's going to break them up? Because like, which I don't, oh my god, my stomach, dear god, I think I do have a gallwood in there, Jesus Christ. And I'm going to sound crazy because you
Why?
can't hear it, but like
I
it's
don't know.
making noise, man, it's making noise. um um, but like, anyways, like in this reality show, the guy that's more of a military dude, like he's very, very structured, and he has to eat so particular, like so healthy, that it's just almost sad. Like I'm all for like someone eating healthy, but it's like very, very like strict healthy. And like it was almost at first like he wasn't wanting his fiance, like, but then they worked it out, but he wasn't wanting his fiance to like switch and like get in like cakes and things like that and blah blah blah. And so anyways, very structured with how they do things, certain times a day, blah blah blah. So I feel like O'Neill is totally that. I feel like he seems like the type that has his set probably the same shirt in all different colors, or maybe it's the same shirt in the same color all in a row in his closet, like maybe similar shoes, and once those shoes are worn out he buys the same shoes again. um make sure his bed is always made and like no messes around, and like very particular about his food and like his hobbies. And like if someone comes into his life that does not have those things, I feel like a wrench is thrown into his life. That's how I envision O'Neill as like his personal life.
Oh my God, I've never thought about it that deeply.
I really haven't
I,
either until like you mentioned it now, and that's all what went into
okay.
my mind
Here I'm,
now.
here I'm thinking, wow, Emily is really thinking very seriously about O'Neill's personal life all the time. What's going on?
That's funny.
I mean, it's really interesting, but yeah. And yeah, so as a contrast, like to what we've just talked about with the visual, like their style and haircuts and SG1. I mean, it's hard to say with Universe because it's so short. It's only 2 seasons. But with Atlantis, it is actually 5 seasons long, which was long enough for, I think, Daniel to go through at least 3 hair phases and Sam to go through 5. I do think that Taylor has a little bit of difference in the haircut, but I don't remember it being noticeable enough. And for sure,
Mhm.
her clothing style remains the same throughout. Ronan
Yeah.
always looks the same. Um, and
Although, sorry, you go ahead, and then I was going to say something about the Taylor character.
yeah, and I think Shepard and McKay visually with their hair and everything is quite similar too.
Yeah.
The whole
Sorry. Also, I know it probably sounds weird when I say the Taylor character. It's just because of my daughter being named Taylor.
yeah, I know, I
I
get
think
it.
it's like this subconscious thing that I don't want to confuse like the two. Like if I'm talking
I
about Taylor, my daughter, or Taylor, the character.
I see. I should do that because here I just throw out Vala all the time indiscriminately and leave you to figure out which one I'm actually talking about. So it's actually
But
very
yeah,
smart.
so Taylor of Stargate Atlantis. So like she, if I remember correctly, I hadn't noticed this, but I remember reading articles where they were talking about her costume changing and how what they basically over time had her little like top get shorter and shorter, like, or I think, right? Like her like made it more of a crop top as opposed to her being fully covered before. And how
Oh,
like
okay.
I think like some people had mentioned that somehow I'd read about it, or people were like maybe feeling like they're trying to like sexualize her character more. I don't know. But like it was just like it went from being completely covered, tight clothing, to her stomach then showing more. So I think that's one change that was with her costume.
I didn't notice. I mean, maybe that's something that's so gradual that you kind of don't notice.
Yeah.
But
I mean, I don't think I did notice. I think it was
I
just because
didn't.
I had read an article um that it mentioned that. And in fact, I believe the first like the beginning costume that she has, I don't even fully remember. Like I always thought of her as wearing something where it was showing her stomach and kind of like a brownish tone colored, where I think in the beginning it's actually like a darker gray or a darker color that's covering her. Um, so yeah.
Interesting. Yeah.
Yeah.
Interesting. I mean, I get
But yeah,
I'm trying to think like of all the people that have a costume, the one that kind of reminds me the most of Taylor's is probably the one from that Tok'ra from SG-1, Freya and Anise.
yes. Yeah.
I think she's
Yeah.
the closest to Taylor, but I've always felt, I mean, her costumes, maybe this is kind of just trying to be Tok'ra-y, although they are kind of individual in their costumes. But it always like Freya and Anise's costume, like I liked it, but I always felt it was a little too like it gave off a very everybody looks the same kind of vibe with the colors. And I
Hmm.
think maybe she had one where it was a little bit more um diverse, but there was one that was like all gray, and it definitely gave this feeling of, we're in the post like this post capitalistic age where everybody wears the same clothing and everybody dresses in gray. But I still
Hmm.
I liked her outfits. I think Taylor has similar outfits, but with more of like a color pop vibe.
Yeah.
So
Yeah.
yeah.
Yeah. And I do remember when watching like some of the actors interviews, I think it was on what's Dial the Gate, I think is that what it's called, Dial the Gate. I remember the actress that played Weir. I remember her talking about how she couldn't stand like that same costume all the time. Like it was like a certain color or lack of color, whatever it was. And then when she wasn't on the show anymore, that's when they switched up the costumes that they were wearing, like the outfits they were wearing. And so she's just like, I remember her like making a joke about that and thinking that that was funny because she couldn't stand the outfit she wore. And then as soon as she left, the outfit changed. Like, so,
Oh my gosh.
um, I don't have a good way of describing it because I didn't think ahead of that and like find it to like describe it. But I do remember like I think it was like a difference in like the sleeves and something like that. Like it's almost like a
Really?
tracksuit type of top. Yeah.
Oh man. But yeah, it's interesting. And I think costume wise, I think I would say in SG-1 and Atlantis, there's a huge difference in the costume of the enemy a lot. Although I think in
Hmm.
SG-1, the costume of the Goa'uld sometimes it transforms later on. Like Anubis obviously looks much darker. So I think it might more
Yeah.
so like correspond. Like if you took SG-1 in season 7, I mean, yeah, there's Ball, where he's kind of more classy looking. But some of the early
Yeah.
Goa'uld were very just kind of flashy and almost like comical how they look. Whereas I
Yeah.
don't think you
Yeah.
could ever call a wraith necessarily comical in that sense. Um,
Right.
Very dramatic. Um, but it's interesting that I haven't really seen, and I think probably you have seen almost now as much universe as me, but I haven't really seen any costuming in universe that is either dramatic or flashy as SG-1 or SGA.
Yeah. It's just all kind of very bland, regular clothes
Mm-hmm.
with universe. I mean, I've only seen up to like episode 9, I think. Um, but of season 1 of SGU, yeah, like I just think of like I mean, I can't even, yeah, it's just like everyday clothes is what's on that show. That doesn't really like nothing that really kind of stands out. I don't really know what that show if they end up having, I mean, don't tell me because I don't remember, but if they end up having like any kind of like villain, main villain thing, or if it's just always about them trying to get off of the ship and then little things happening here and there. I don't
Yeah, I
know.
don't know. I mean, other than in the beginning, it's like the Lucian Alliance kind of attacks, but I think the main villain, you're correct, it's the ship. It's like the main thing.
Mm-hmm.
I mean, I know
Yeah.
that it kind of has this sort of a underlying thing, but it's really the ship, and they encounter things that are weird. I mean, yeah, there's been various, I mean, like just like in every show, there's various things, but I mean, we don't see anything really pan out to like be a consistent thing in the
Yeah.
same
So
way.
I
Yeah.
Yeah, so I think like the villain is really technically their situation of being stuck.
Hmm.
And it's always about trying to get back home. And so that too, makes it so much different from the other two, where the other two always have like different like main villain things that come into the show and then that's the threat, right? Like um so yeah, it's interesting. And I do think like it was funny when you're talking about the Wraith because like I was just like, dang, now I kind of want to see an episode where there's like the outcast race that is just like this silly race that doesn't want to
Yes.
be a Wraith and is just kind of dorky and silly and almost like a Feldger and Coombs of the Wraith world.
Yes. A suit and super flashy, like dressed super flashy costumes.
Yeah, yeah.
And then like runs into the team and they completely get sarcastic, like in a total like Stargate style sarcasm with this like wraith.
Oh
And it
my
has to be
God.
it has to be a wraith too that's like really over the top and really
Yeah.
thinks that they're maximum wraith. Like, you know.
Like like I just think it'd be just so funny like to have a funny race where it's just like they're just so like over the top and the opposite of that. So when you brought that up, I was just like, oh my gosh, now I really want to see that. I really do.
Totally, absolutely. Oh my gosh. But yeah, it's interesting. It's very interesting that there's this sort of costuming that maybe gave a vibe to the enemies in the
Yeah.
shows. But then you get to universe, and I think there isn't something like that. But the vibe of the enemy is the ship, which is this like really claustrophobic, crunchy, dark aesthetic. So,
Yeah.
and I know I feel like the ship aesthetics in Atlantis were starting to get more where like the ship was part of it too, because those like wraith
Yeah.
ships were alive. And I think they really put more of an emphasis on this visualized aspect of the wraith ship.
Hmm.
I know that the Goa'uld ships were clearly very taken into account, but I feel like somehow this aesthetic consideration was maybe more at the foreground in a wraith, um, because I felt more of a presence of the ship. I don't know if you experienced the same thing, but I felt more of a presence of the ship itself on Wraith ship than in the Goa'uld top, like the big gold ships or whatever.
Yeah. That's a really good point. I wouldn't have thought about it really. But yeah, I did feel that. Um, it's so interesting too, like talking about this, how you start to realize all the little elements that make the viewer get that experience, right? It's kind of like that's why it's probably so important,
Yeah.
with those people that choose those things on a show because it makes the viewer feel something from that story. Even just from things like costume and lighting and things like that. But yeah, you are right about the Wraith ships.
I think also the music was very different in all three. And I know both of us are composers, so maybe we have a little bit of a different emphasis placed on music. I know for me, um, music is something that is really, really strong in shows. I always remember the theme. It it's something that is just very important to me. So for me, I think the difference in the musical aesthetics is also really intriguing because I think we recently discussed as we were talking about kind of rewatching SG1 that in the first season you have like this extremely epic, almost like film music, because I think a lot of it was sort of taken inspired by the film and using that as a basis. um even though actually oddly the stakes in the first season were not quite as high as later on. But I think later on, as there was more designed for SG1, specifically music, you get more character themes, and the music has more of like, I don't really know how to describe it other than it's a little bit of a softer vibe. And I think even the Goa'uld theme in SG1 has a softer vibe because it doesn't quite have the same full orchestral feeling. It has this obviously, like probably Vienna East West Symphony feeling of how they did shows at the time with samples, and it has a little bit of a lighter, softer feeling. But I also think it's somehow it has more. I feel the music then has this more personal relationship with the show and personal relationship with the characters and themes. I actually think the music in Atlantis is very similar to me than the music in SG1. Although it has maybe a bit more of a, like, especially this theme song to me has a little bit more of like a forward optimism feeling.
Mm.
In terms of the sound of universe, I find that it is almost like very drony and less present with theme and more present with atmospheric texture. So those are kind of like my
Yes.
basic observations in terms
Yeah.
of the music.
Yeah. Definitely. I think with SG1, I honestly hadn't noticed. I mean, maybe I did and I'm just not remembering, but I hadn't initially remembered noticing like a more full out orchestral and then going to a softer sound later in SG1. I do remember just kind of thinking like it's very like orchestral because like if you think about like especially shows like when I first started watching SG1 um back with the first watch through, I remember noticing the music because at that time you didn't hear that in shows anymore. It was
Mm-hmm.
never like, because like if you think of even like movies like Home Alone and things like that, it's like they have like I guess like you says what you would characterize as like a film music. But I think being a film composer, I don't always think of that as film music because then I think, well, there's also films that have lighter sounds and all of that, like I think of like like it kind of like with film music it's now has kind of gotten back to the bigger sounds of that typical kind of film music sound, but there's also like if you think of films that have like a softer side and have just piano or whatever in it, and that's the film music, right? So
Totally,
it's
totally.
like um, I think with SG1, what I did notice was, like you says, it's like a dramatic um orchestral sound. And then
Mm-hmm.
and then you're right, it does like lessen that somewhat. Um and then like this time through when I'm watching with Taylor, because like I haven't watched it through many times. I know you've watched it through like and listened to it while you're working on stuff that you're probably much more in tune with all of those like themes and recognizing them. And I know you're good with remembering that. So like with myself, like I then like this watch through, then I was just like, oh, like I'm noticing the little theme they're playing like every time, like there's like the gold and like, like I think like initially I maybe didn't notice that. I did notice that like I really liked the music, but I didn't always notice the very specific themes and little like things for like characters and stuff. So that's kind of cool to hear. I do remember what, and I'm curious how I'll feel as I eventually get to the watch through with Atlantis, because I do remember when I went through this first watch through of Atlantis, um, I do remember saying to you like I noticed a clear difference in the music,
Mm-hmm.
um, and not so much that it's like it's massively different, but it did feel more modern to me in the
Yeah,
sense of it not being quite as like old old film sound, if that makes sense, like kind of like it kind of like may have added in a little bit of a beat at times, like or an electronic. I'm trying to remember what it was that I'd heard, but I just remember noticing a difference, like something about it, or just the way they had certain instruments playing certain kind of almost rhythmic sections in the strings and things like that that weren't normally there, I think, all the time in like the SG1 music stuff. And I could be remembering it all backwards, but that's kind of what I remember thinking at the time. And then yes, with SGU, definitely it's like that's perfect. I think of explanation that you had of saying it's atmospheric because yeah, there's no like clear like strong like melody, right? Or like it's just like it does give that vibe and it creates like that the atmosphere, like what you were saying, like the atmospheric vibe. So um yeah, I mean, and with each one it does like if you just kind of hear the music it does kind of immediately kind of instill that vibe of the show like within me. It's kind of like if you hear the SG1 like sound, it's like I get all like tickled and like excited about SG1, or it's like Atlantis, and then with like universe it's like I always hesitate to use like their opening credits or ending credits sound like on TikTok when you try and find the sounds, like to add to a video sometimes. um the universe one is just like kind of sad sounding. Like I love the sound of it. And that's not what I mean, but it's just in terms of like adding it to a video, it doesn't give that like excitement. It's just kind of like you said, it's the long drawn out tones and everything. So
Yeah.
so
No,
yeah.
it's very true. I was actually just about to ask you, like, would you think that the music kind of matches the overall aesthetic and vibe in the show? And I think you just said like it's
Yeah.
totally true. Definitely does.
Yeah. Yeah.
It's super interesting. And yeah, for me, it adds a lot to the show. And I would say, from my perspective, soundtrack wise, I really love like sort of season 2 and 3 of SG1 onwards, and then also Atlantis is like my sort of sweet spot. It's not that I don't like the early season of SG1, but it does have too much of like this Hollywood movie that was sci-fi coming out in the 90s
Yeah.
aesthetic to it. And I think because it was sort of made after the movie, I think is it just there's something about afterwards that the music just really feels like it's personally belonging to the show, that I feel that because you get the character
Yeah.
themes. I mean, I like Atlantis for a lot of similar reasons. And I think you're right. Like there's this sort of more optimistic modern feel. Um you also get some of that in like some of the scenes of O'Neill and um Mayborn when they're doing more actiony stuff in later SG1,
Oh,
and I really like that sort of sounds where they have maybe more electronics or
yeah.
more rhythm. But I
Yeah.
love it.
I'll have to pay attention to that. Yeah, I'll look out
Yeah,
for that when
but
I'm rewatching.
yeah, but to me, I love it. And I like shouldn't say like I don't like Universe, because I really do love. I mean, I write a lot of atmospheric music. I'm really into drone music, that kind of thing. So,
Yeah.
and there is some video game soundtracks where I've never played the game, even, but this soundtrack is really like atmospheric. But I
Yeah.
feel like there's just less musical presence in Universe, or maybe it is like somehow presented in a way that you feel a presence of the music kind of lower, and so it's harder for me to identify things that I might go, oh, I really want to keep listening to that. I don't know if you've experienced the same similar thing.
Yeah, yeah. And I mean, I do feel like it's kind of a common thing. Like I'm trying to think of like film shorts I've worked on sometimes that have kind of like dark scenes. And often what they're looking for is more of an atmosphere, um, that kind of vibe, like what they do in universe. They're looking for that kind of vibe for the scene as opposed to something that's going to, I feel like it's interesting because I feel like um when music is used in a scene a lot of times like you don't necessarily want it to distract you from what's going on in the scene, but at the same time when you think of these movies that are sci-fi and everything, it has these big moments with all the music that it's so noticeable. But it at the same time can play these like tunes and melodies and stuff and somehow not distract you from what's going on. But I kind of feel because of how universe is and how they're stuck in a ship and like these things are happening, but it's in a much different way than the action of what's happening in like Atlantis and SG1. It's just different. And so I feel like if they were to have had a similar sounding soundtrack to what they normally do, it would feel probably really strange
Mhm.
in that sense. And I do love atmospheric sounding music, and like it's just it does give like a certain vibe, you know, when you're listening to that. And if like for example, like when you're looking for music for like short clips on TikTok, it just to me doesn't work well for like if you're like trying to just like, you know, say, hey, our video is up, and then you attach the music to it and it's just like this like long tone, you know, like
Yeah, yes. Yes, exactly. No,
um
I completely agree. Yeah. Um,
yeah.
although
But I think if
have,
oh sorry, go ahead.
I have one time used droney sound on a TikTok and it was like my most successful TikTok. So, but it was,
Really?
yep.
What is it? Which wait, which like are you able to say like
Oh
which
yeah, it was
post
just,
you're
I mean,
talking
it
about?
was not just TikTok, it was also like on other platform, but it ended up being very successful. It was one where I was showing how I attach a microphone to a blade and then
Ah,
share some like ASMR. So maybe I chose the droney sound because any kind of music that was not so like that would overtake the sounds that were present. So actually a couple
yeah,
times I had to do that. So I think this kind of comes back to there are times when you really need that kind of sound. And
exactly. Yeah.
maybe if I watch, because I think it's also a little bit unfair. I've watched so much more Atlantis and SG1 than Universe. And maybe if I watch a lot of Universe, especially when you kind of watch something and you're not like really focused on the narrative, you can start focusing more on the music, I think. Or you it
Yeah.
so maybe I just haven't really noticed as much because I am personally like I'm always loving this kind of atmospheric stuff is like I love it. But
Yeah.
yeah.
Yeah, and you are right. Like when you're especially like it's your first time ever watching Universe. And so your focus is going to be on like what's going on because you've never seen it before. For me, it's
Yes.
my second time through, but it's still a what's going on because I don't remember anything that happened. So it's kind of like you are right that once you actually rewatch it, because that's kind of like with SG1. I haven't watched SG1 often. You've watched it way more many times than me. And now it's just me rewatching with Taylor that I'm starting to notice some of like the little themes and motifs and everything that are within the show that I didn't fully always recognize, or if I did recognize, it was more of like in the back of my mind kind of thing, you know? So that is a good point because I do think people that aren't necessarily into music in the same way that we are probably do get something out of the music being on a show or on a film, but many times do not notice it, right? Like, so
Yeah.
like it adds to the scene, but they're not fully aware of it. So then but they would notice it if it was gone. So if all of the music was stripped from the show, you know, it'd probably feel very strange to people. So, um, yeah, it'd be really fascinating to hear like both people that are into music and not into music as composers and stuff and instrumentalists. Like if you just enjoy listening to it, like what do you think of the show's music? Did you notice differences? Did you not notice differences between SG1, Atlantis, and Universe? Yeah, we'd love to hear your thoughts.
And here I would also like to leave with this one question. What aesthetic aspect do you think contributed the most to each show's distinctive character? If you had to pick one aesthetic aspect, whether it's like the clothing, the visuals of the set, the music, what for you kind of sold the setting for you the most?